This topic today, the climate smart environment, is something that is kind of a hot topic these days, and it's ever changing. And if there's one thing about agriculture that we've learned, is that it is ever changing. And one thing about the industry and its producers is that they are resilient and adaptable. And so we will hear from a handful of speakers today about this new ever-changing environment of this climate smart topic. And so at Farm Credit Illinois, one thing we are not concerned about is that our producers will be adaptable and be resilient. So based on what you hear today and what comes from the current administration and any policies, we know that historically you have made those adaptations and you have been resilient, and we are still here today, and so we have no doubt in our mind that you will be here again through this whole climate smart environment and changes that are to come ahead of us. So we will go ahead and kick things off with the U of I Farm Doc group that we have with us. We have Sarah Sellers, Krista Swanson, and Dr. Gary Schnittke.
So first I want to start out by just mentioning some of the materials we've been working on. We have a series of YouTube videos about carbon markets. It's on the Farm Doc YouTube channel. It's called Carbon Markets 101. So we kind of go over some of the basics. And then we also have a couple of Farm Doc Daily articles. What questions should farmers ask about selling carbon credits? And the Growing Climate Solutions Act impact on farmers. And we have more in the pipeline, so feel free, if you want to get in touch with us, we can share those with you, and keep an eye out for some of our materials coming your way. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and introduction of carbon markets and climate smart agriculture and forestry. Dr. Schnittke will cover the economics of carbon markets, and Krista will be talking about the policy environment of carbon and climate smart agriculture and forestry, or CSAF as the USDA calls it. So first, a little background. So the emphasis on climate change that we're seeing now is a direct result of the last election. We were already headed this way though, so future changes in administration may change the speed and approaches, but it's likely not to change the trajectory of where we're going. And the administration has stated that its goal is to reach net neutrality. This is because the US is a participant in the Paris Agreement, which Krista will discuss a little more in the policy section. But all of this that we're seeing is a direct result of that. But the good thing is agriculture is being looked at as a solution more of a solution instead of a problem, due to its potential to store carbon in the soil, trees, and plants. So if we look at emissions in the US, we can see that transportation, electricity generation, and industry are the major sources of emissions. And agriculture is a relatively small piece here compared to those other industries. So this is good because we want to be seen as more of a solution, in hopes that there will be a focus here on voluntary programs and as farmers as a solution to climate change. So where's this demand coming from for carbon credits? So we see demand from this US has pledged to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So we see a policy push, but we're also seeing increased demand from the private sector for carbon credits. This is because many companies are setting emissions targets, maybe because their shareholders want them to, maybe for another reason, but many companies are saying that they want to reach net neutrality or setting some of these goals. 1/5 of the world's largest publicly listed companies have adopted net zero emissions targets. So if they cannot reduce their emissions through improving their own processes, increasing their efficiency, then they must look to another source, and that source is by purchasing carbon offsets. So it's estimated that US forestry and agriculture could provide 10 to 20% of the sequestration and emissions reduction potential needed to reach this net zero emissions by 2050. And there's a lot of potential here. So currently, US agriculture, we're storing 8.4 million metric tons of carbon in the soil per year in the US. And the annual estimated potential is 100 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. So we do have that ability to store a lot of carbon in the soil. So why is this all happening now? Why have carbon markets and climate-smart agriculture become such a hot topic? Where has all of this come from? So all the actions and reports we are seeing, such as the USDA Climate Smart Agriculture 90-Day Progress Report, the push to increase the CRP enrollment, the discussion about voluntary carbon markets for farmers, these are all a direct result of the executive order on tackling climate change, the climate crisis at home and abroad. This was released on January 27th. And this executive order directly mentions carbon and how farmers can play a role in the carbon crisis by sequestering carbon in soils, grasses, trees, and other vegetation. So you may be wondering, what exactly is climate-smart agriculture and what practices are they talking about when they say this? So in the most recent report, the USDA, as required by the executive order, had to release this 90-day climate-smart agriculture report. So in this report, they define climate-smart agriculture as activities that store carbon and improve resilience and soil health. And some of these practices that they mention in this report are reduced and no-till cover crops, prescribed grazing, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, ruminant feed management, manure management, fertilizer management, improved on-farm energy efficiency, and improved forestry management. So these are some of the things they're thinking about when they're saying climate-smart agriculture and forestry. So back in April, we heard Robert Bonney. He told farmers at various conferences to expect a suite of generally incentive-based tools to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, capture carbon, and combat climate change. And we also heard the same thing again in the most recently released report in May, the 90-day Climate Smart Ag Progress Report. In the introduction, Secretary Vilsack states that their approach will be centered on voluntary incentives that benefit producers and landowners. So the point I want to make here is these keywords keep appearing, voluntary incentive and incentives. So this is a good sign because we all know the alternative, which are regulations, which is something we do not want. So we see this is the result of two efforts simultaneously, government policy and private carbon markets. So when we look at government policy, we can break that into two parts. We have congressional action and administrative activities. So on the congressional action side, we have the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which Krista will get into more in the policy part later. But the idea of this act is to help reduce the barriers of entry into voluntary carbon markets for farmers. And we can also see the use of USDA's administrative activities for carbon markets. So the USDA has stated that they plan to leverage existing programs, like think NRCS programs, to support climate-smart agriculture and forestry. They also have stated that they are prepared to quantify, track, and report the benefits of climate-smart agriculture and forestry activities. So this could be by using existing USDA tools, or they stated that they could develop new tools as well. We also see the use of private carbon markets. So we see different companies launch these carbon markets for voluntary enrollment for farmers. Currently, there are 11 voluntary carbon markets here in the U.S. where farmers can enroll in. So how exactly do private carbon markets work? So you have the farmer who sells their carbon credits to the integrator. The integrator can either buy credits from the farmer and sell them to private companies, or if the integrator is an emitter and wants to reduce the emissions, they may be able to use the carbon credits in their own business as well. The private entities that purchase carbon credits then use this to lower their emissions and promote to their shareholders that they have reduced emissions or reached net neutrality, depending on their goals. So these markets will exist as long as there is a demand by private entities for carbon credits. So as long as they can't reach this emissions reduction through their own processes, through improving their own business, there's going to be this demand for carbon credits. So we've had a lot of people ask us, so how exactly do you measure carbon in the soil? So there's different ways to measure this. You can use remote sensing, indicators, or soil sampling. So with remote sensing, you can use satellites to look at things like cover crops. Some pros of this are it's very scalable and it's inexpensive. So we also have soil sampling, and this is going to be a more expensive option, but it's also more accurate than some of these other methods we look at, and it's not as easy to scale. We also have indicators, which are things like the amount of fertilizer applied to the field, which can tell us about the level of greenhouse gases being emitted from the field. And then we also have computer modeling. So computer modeling can take these pieces and tie them all together to give us an estimate about carbon storage. So when we're looking at cost, accuracy, and scale, the most feasible way is to use this computer modeling to tie these together. So what are the benefits of carbon markets? So as interest grows in no-till, nitrogen reduction practices, cover crops, and there are costs to adopting many of these practices, carbon credits may present some financial incentives to farmers to adopt new practices that they might not otherwise receive. We have heard from the companies we talked with that you can stack carbon credits with other government programs. This would allow the farmers to reach approximately $40 to $50 per acre of payment and help them to cover some of the costs of adopting some of these practices. But this could change as the carbon market evolves. And another thing to keep in mind is there are co-benefits to most of these practices, so improvements in soil health and also benefits for air, biodiversity, and water. So when we look at carbon markets, we see that 39% of farmers are aware of carbon market opportunities in a recent survey by the Purdue Agricultural Economy Barometer. But we see only 1% of farmers have entered a contract. So this is an emerging market and there's still a lot of uncertainty. So why are people not entering this market? In a Farm Journal Pulse poll taken in March, the main reason that the farmers surveyed said they are not entering the market is a lack of reliable information. So we really need more information that farmers can trust, unbiased information and research done before people will feel more comfortable to enter these carbon markets. And we also want to share this recently published resource. This is a publication from Iowa State University Extension. It compares the 11 private voluntary carbon markets for farmers. And so in our article, what questions should farmers ask about selling carbon credits? We posed a lot of different questions that farmers should ask, and this article goes through those questions and tries to answer them. It's a good resource to save time because all the carbon market information is in one document, so you don't have to go from company website to company website looking for this information. So if you need help finding this document, please feel free to email us, get in touch with us. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Gary Schnicke. He's a professor in the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Economics at University of Illinois, and he'll be covering the economic portion.
I'm going to go over the economics of carbon markets, and I'm going to start here with just to give you a feel for some of the practices that would likely lead to soil carbon increases as they are practiced in East Central Illinois. These are soil carbon scores from PCM. This is Precision Conservation Management. PCM, which is in this area, and some of you may actually be enrolled in PCM. If you have a fields enrolled in PCM, one of the things that you get out of that is a soil carbon score, which is a number from 1 to -1, and with 0 being a differentiation point. If you're above 0, supposedly according to this model, you're sequestering carbon. If you're below 0, you're using carbon. This is sort of so if you're looking at it, you can't say if I have a 1, it's 1 metric ton of carbon emissions, but it's a score. So it's a score. This score comes from field to market. So this is a model that's maintained by field to market. And again, these are fields from East Central Illinois, and we divided those up into corn and soybeans. And then we did tillage benchmarks here, so farmers with no-till, strip-till, 1 pass light, 2 pass, and then 2+ passes. If you're looking at those scores, first off, the scores are always higher for corn than for soybeans. Corn, for whatever reason, according to this model, will sequester more carbon than soybeans, probably because of the largeness of the crop or something along that line. But you'll see corn will, again, according to this model, sequester more than soybeans. And as you're going down the list, as you increase the tillage, you reduce the soil carbon score. So no-till, strip-till, may seem sort of ironic, but strip-till has a little bit higher score than no-till, but I don't have a good explanation for that. So there's other things that are going on there behind this, and so the strip-till people might be doing something on the other side that would impact something along that. But as you see here, as you go down and you increase the tillage passes, you will lower the carbon score. So every time you do a tillage pass, you can think about that as reducing the carbon score. Same thing for soybeans. And again, if you get a 2+ pass light, you can, in these scores, we see some negative ones, some combinations. Soybeans and heavy tillage often result in sort of scores below 0. So just to give you, and again, I'm just saying this is a model. It's making a model prediction. We also do a cover crop benchmark, no overwintering and terminal. And you can see here that the cover crop benchmark does, if you have a cover crop, it does impact positively the soil carbon score. Again, those soil carbon scores there, you can't translate those to metric tons of soil or carbon sequestered, but it does give you a feel, again, for what the models are going to say that these things do in the field market would be fairly representative a model of this. And this is from East Central Illinois. So this is the area that you're sitting in right now, and would be those presentations. Again, if you're looking at this, corn will sequester more than soybeans. Tillage, the more tillage you do, the lower the sequestration. Cover crops in general will increase carbon sequestration. And the nitrogen system does matter as well, and nitrogen and pounds of nitrogen applied. It actually has less of an impact in this model and other ones as well about what is happening in the soil. Again, remember, for these soil carbon markets, it's what's sequestered in the soil. Hopefully in the end you can measure that so that you can say, hey, that did happen. But again, a lot of this is now being based on models which are based on research findings from research plots. So that's sort of the state of the art here. Now I want to go down and show you. So this is from East Central Illinois again. So it gives you a feel for some of the practices. Here, this is a relative. This is from 2013. So this is getting a little bit older, but not that old either. In terms of things, I still remember that year, so it can't be too old. Sarah and Krista were alive then, so it's not too old either. So, but here's what they would say: a move from reduced till to no-till will reduce, or has the potential to increase, soil carbon sequestration by 0.42 metric tons. So if you go from reduced to no-till, the potential is 0.42, and obviously there's a range around that. So, and that study would have estimated that the break-even price for you to adopt that would have been $30 per metric ton of sequestration. So they're making some assumptions about what's happening there as that's being adopted, and that may vary for your operation, right? So, but they would say $30 per break-even price. Conventional till to no-till, 0.42 to 0.65, so we're going up. And then conventional till to reduced till, 0.22. So again, what they're saying that's corn. Soybeans, again, the same thing that we saw from the last one. Soybeans, the ability to sequester carbon is less for soybeans than for corn. All right, I'm going to take these numbers, 0.42, 0.65, and 0.13, and I'm going to put them on a per acre basis on this next slide, so to give you a feel what we're talking about. Again, these are, if you implement those practices on your field, this is what would be expected. Again, going back, if some of these contracts require you meant to measure soil carbon before and after the fact, and I'll tell you right now, this is just, all right, that's going to probably be a little bit difficult to do, and let me just give you an illustration. If I took you a field that you have right now and asked you what the average pH of that field is, it would be difficult for you to answer. And it would vary depending on when you did grid sampling or not, and whether you went back to the same point. And you're going to have all those same issues with soil carbon. Just, you will have those same issues moving forward. And that, I'm not saying anything about companies, just there will be issues there, and they'll have to come up with methods to make sure that they're measuring it before and after. All right, but let's take 0.42, and we've been hearing prices between $10 and $20 per metric ton, with $20 at the high end. Okay? If we look at that, reduced to no-till and corn, if we have 0.42, $20, that's $8.40 an acre. Okay, just that if following that. Conventional to no-till, $13 per acre, $2.60, $2.60. So that'll give you a feel again, and again, how much of that you're sequestering will depend. We're looking at model results, and that's all we have right now. So that's sort of what we're looking at there. Eric, you seem like you got a question.
Dr. Sinke, is that per year or
that would be per year?
Per year.
Per year.
Okay.
So if you're doing this practice already, it's worthwhile, right? Maybe making a switch is less worthwhile. Again, if you want to, so I'm expecting. I think this administration also wants to put into some policies, which are having a slower time doing than we might have expected, or they expected. I don't know what you expected, but it's slower than maybe we expected, or I expected. I don't know, but it's and if we had a policy that added to that, then you're beginning to get more interested in this whole thing. Right. All right. Here is fertilizer practices for corn, and they come out with a break-even price of 167 with a 0.08 emission potential. Again, there is some emission potential there, but it's generally from the models, and I don't know. Maybe Cargill will have something different to say about this, but the models that I see would say it does reduce nitrogen or does increase carbon emission or sequestration. By the way, probably the bigger reason for looking at these nitrogen policies is not from carbon sequestration, but our concern here about nitrates in the Gulf of Mexico. So, and these would have a bigger impact on those. Here's for cover crops, and here's several studies. Came up with 0.5 metric ton per year, 0.16, 0.35 metric ton. They thought $10 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent per year Those are measuring CO2 equivalent per year, so that they're putting all it on a CO2 basis. So there's the 10, but I just took those numbers there. Oops, 0.5 times 20, again, $10 per acre. So if that actually did happen. So that's where those numbers look at right now. Again, I'm going to make this point. Most of the knowledge that we say are based on models, and those models. Well, I'm a modeler. Models are good, but they can be wrong. So, the actual practice of that may result in something different. And again, we're now looking or trying to take this out into a big area, and where those models may probably didn't. And again, actual practice may vary from those model values. I personally think that the stacking of policies, if you had a soil carbon market along with federal policy, as long as those federal policies allow stacking, you could.
So my husband and I actively farm as well. So I work remotely from Knox County where we farm. So I guess I kind of approach this. I'm in the same boat as all of you in thinking about trying to make these decisions for our farm and think about what's going on. So we're going to talk a little bit about the policy side, which Gary and Sarah have both mentioned several times. So this slide just shows what I'm planning to talk about, a little bit of a policy history, the Paris Agreement and why that's important when we think about carbon markets, and then some ag policy highlights from this year so far, the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which has been mentioned by Gary and Sarah a few times, and then what to watch for going forward. So this isn't a complete timeline necessarily of everything that's happened over the past 30 years, but just to show, I put this up here because I wanted to show some highlights or some major milestones that have occurred. And I tend to think of climate change as being a really big topic, or how to address climate change in the last couple years, but really this has been something that's been on the governmental radar for about 30 years, going all the way back to the early 90s. US Congress has actually debated climate change going all the way back to then. And there's been various laws that have been proposed, or bills that have been proposed in Congress over that time to reduce emissions or speed the development of clean energy. And some other efforts have been made. I'm sure you remember back the Obama era cap and trade type of proposals that didn't really go anywhere. So going all the way back, like I said, to the early 90s, in 1992, actually President George H.W. Bush signed an agreement with the United Nations on climate change. And then that same year, Congress added a renewable energy tax credit, which has been a critical part of the rapid expansion in wind energy that we have seen since then. And that particular credit has been extended over the years. There has been a few lapses in it over time, but and then in 2005, a new credit was added in conjunction with that was for solar. So I'm like you, I'm sure you feel like you've seen a lot of wind and solar popping up in that time. And that's part of the reason why. Then in 1997, the Senate actually, so the Kyoto, there was a meeting of the United Nations that was happening in Kyoto, Japan, and it was kind of an extension of that early 90s agreement. And the Senate had some concerns about that because it was going to require emissions, it was going to have emissions targets, but only for developed nations. And so there was some concern about how that might impact the United States competitiveness. And then in 2001, President George W. Bush declared that we would not join that. And then from 2003 to 2007, there was a lot of bipartisan efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but nothing that was ever passed. Despite that some of those were bipartisan efforts, they never garnered enough support from everyone. In 2007, Congress mandated the public reporting of greenhouse gas emissions from large sources. And this is kind of important because if you remember back, Sarah showed a pie chart of emissions from different large sources. And that stems from this requirement going back to 2007. And now over 40 different categories are required to report for that. So then moving ahead to 2008, climate was one of President Obama's top legislative priorities, but nothing was ever achieved. Nothing ever got enough support to become law. And then in 2015, there was major changes to those renewable energy tax credits. Congress at that time decided to extend them, but with a phase out that actually is still set to expire in 2024 unless in the meantime it gets extended. Another highlight related to Congress is the formation of the Climate Solutions Caucus in 2016. And then I noted in 2018 some tax credits and surrounding carbon pricing, and that was actually part of a budget deal passed in 2018 that was signed by President Trump. And then since 2019, climate has become more and more priority, and part of the reason for that is the Democrats took control of the House, and that was a big priority for that party in particular, and that's really continued over the last 2 years, and especially now with the Biden presidency, and that being a big target of his. So I guess the summary from this slide is that there's been a lot of movement and pushes from different groups of people over the last 30 years, but not until recent years have we really seen this begin to take off. So I want to talk a little bit about the Paris Climate Agreement, and Sarah mentioned our YouTube channel having a 5-minute farm doc series with various 5-minute videos on different topics, and there is one on the Paris Agreement, so I'm going to kind of include some bits and pieces from that video, but if you want to learn more about it, that video is up. So the Paris Climate Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change that was adopted in Paris, which is why, hence the name. And it was a deal that united almost every nation in the world for the first time in a single climate-related agreement. And it established a framework for combating global climate change. And one of the key parts of it was to limit the increase in global temperature. So the temperature's increasing, but the goal is to keep it from exceeding 1.5 degrees over a pre-industrial revolution benchmark. So that's kind of what it's tied to. Another key part is to achieve what they're calling climate neutrality. So what that means is that any emissions that are produced, we want to offset with those carbon captures, and that's kind of what spurred the carbon markets to develop. And so the goal with that is to be carbon neutral by the middle of this century. Another key part of the Paris Agreement that kind of stands out is what's called it's this bottom-up approach to how the agreement works. So rather than a top-down approach where some group of people says, this is the rules for your country, or these are the goals that you have to meet, each country actually set their own set of goals. And these are called nationally determined contributions, and each individual country plans how to meet those goals and regularly reports on their progress. And so that's a bottom-up approach that really brings some transparency and a different type of approach to mitigation than what we had seen historically. And let me move to the next slide. So again, it's that voluntary, let me see here. So each country is setting its own, those nationally determined contributions. And so each country is kind of working individually for this larger goal. But of course, there may be some times where countries want to collaborate. There could be situations where one country has surpassed their goals and another country has fallen short, and maybe they want to sell or do some sort of trade. So there's actually an article of the Paris Agreement, Article 6, that discusses this idea of voluntary cooperation. And there are 3 approaches included in there that are proposed as ways to go about this voluntary cooperation. For instance, selling overachievement, or number 3 is a non-market approach. But number 2 would be to create an international carbon market. And so what's important about this is that Article 6 has not been settled or agreed upon yet. It's the only part of this agreement that has yet to be settled. And it's expected, there's a meeting in the United Nations that's happening in November of this year, and it's expected that this will be something that is discussed and hopefully decided upon. So this kind of section still remains in a debate. There's some argue that creating an international carbon market would result in countries and businesses working together and we would achieve goals faster. But others are worried that that could undermine the process or lead to other problems. So this is really important to monitor because depending on what's decided in terms of the Paris Agreement and how this gets finalized, it could influence the carbon markets as we know them and how they're operating now. So I want to talk through some of the highlights of the policy environment related to agriculture throughout this year. So first we have January 27, 2021. Sarah already talked about this, so I'm not going to go into much detail, but President Biden had an executive order that is kind of what's been publicized as this 30 by 30 plan, where we would conserve at least 30% of our lands by 2030. And there was a lot of questions about that from agriculture and how that would work, and if our cropland or pasture land or forest lands would be taken out of production forcefully. I think the government's been pretty clear in answering that they don't plan to do that. But it still, I think, as a farmer, remains a bit of a concern. We'll talk about that more in here in a second. In April 2021, the USDA announced that it was going to reopen CRP enrollment, which wasn't slated to happen originally, so that was kind of one method and maybe gathering some more of those lands. And actually, hopefully anyone who wanted to take advantage of that already did, because that sign up ran through, just closed last week. And then in May, the part of that executive order from January was that there would be a progress report issued within a couple months. And so in May, there was a report that outlined the conservation goals and how kind of the rough plan for meeting that 30 by 30 executive order goal. And so there was some various actions proposed in this overall. And I think Sarah mentioned this too, but 12% of US land is already permanently protected for conservation. And the executive order proposes getting to 30%. So if that tells you what we need to go by 2030, we still need to garner that other 18% in conservation. So we're falling short of that goal currently. And of course, agricultural land, like I mentioned, is a potential source for conservation. And it's most likely we would foresee this happening through expanded programs like CRP or similar to CRP. This analysis does show that it appears that we could actually reach this 30% goal without taking additional agricultural lands into conservation. However, it's likely that some of that land will be ag land. This report outlines that it may voluntarily be taken out of production and put into some of those types of programs. So that's kind of what we know from this report now, is more specifics on maybe how we're going to get to that 30% goal. Later in May, the USDA produced a 90-day progress report on climate-smart agriculture and forestry, and this is something that Sarah also mentioned. So this report gives us more insight into what it's calling climate-smart agriculture, and that's kind of become this keyword phrase that we're using a lot now. And it included a lot of broad ideas but lacked specific details. And so one thing to note is that the report did not mention any sort of USDA carbon bank, and it did note voluntary carbon markets like those that are currently operating. It outlines 7 areas of focus, which I'm not going to go through all of those today, but most importantly, it talked about supporting new and better markets for climate smart practices, and it had a section on research as well. So those are some of the areas, I guess, to note. And then finally, in June, the Senate passed the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that. So the Growing Climate Solutions Act is a piece of legislation that the Senate passed, like I said, in June, with really amazing bipartisan support. It actually passed with 92 votes in favor of the bill, and the 8 votes against it were split between Republicans and Democrats. So that tells you a lot about the amount of bipartisan support for this bill. What's interesting is that the companion bill is currently held up in the House, and it's kind of, Gary mentioned, maybe a little surprising that this isn't moving through a lot faster, given the strong level of bipartisan support in the Senate. There's people on both sides of the aisle that are expressing concerns with various parts of this climate bill. I'm going to talk about why it could be a really good thing for farmers. So really, it would help. There was a lot of parts of this bill that would be beneficial to farmers. It supported voluntary market-driven programs like those that are already operating. And really, the passage of this bill is kind of the Senate's signal of the government's desire to support these independent carbon marketplace as opposed to a government carbon marketplace. So what the bill really sought to do was to address the lack of regulation and consistency. Sarah highlighted on that a little bit, but one of the biggest problems from a farmer perspective in terms of the carbon market options that are out there is that we're kind of inundated with a lot of different options that are operating in different ways. Some programs are paying per acre, some are paying per practice, some are based on just the practice, some are based on measurements, and there's different ways of measuring. Sarah talked about all those types of things. So that makes it really confusing if it's something that you're considering. This bill actually seeks to address some of that by doing that, through several ways that I'll talk about here in just a second. So first, it has protections and assistance for farmers. And so basically the USDA would identify what practices this bill would require the USDA to identify practices that reduce net greenhouse gas emissions and set a baseline for those. So one thing that we're hearing from farmers a lot as we've done, so Gary said this is the first time he's been in front of an actual crowd in a year and a half, but he didn't mention how many times he's done virtual presentations, but we've actually talked to several different farmer groups about carbon markets, especially in the last month or two. And one thing that we're hearing a lot is that, there's no baseline, and we've also talked to several companies offering these programs who have expressed that it would be helpful if the government would set some sort of a baseline. Also, it would tell the USDA to create a third-party verification process. So that's another concern I think a lot of farmers have is, how are my credits verified? Or what really constitutes a carbon credit? Am I getting paid fairly for those carbon credits? And so some of this bill seeks to set some of those standards for farmers. It would also create a farmer advisory board to get input on all these things as to how USDA should set those as they work towards that. So overall, what the Growing Climate Solutions Act does is develop a framework for consistent, transparent, science-based approaches. So that way, for farmers who are looking to get into the market, it's a little bit easier to make a comparison from program to program. And this is another topic which we have a 5-minute Farm Doc video on. It's not posted yet, but will be very soon. So I just gave some highlights, but if you want to hear the full 5-minute version on that, then you can find that. So topics to watch. I put USDA Carbon Bank on here. So even though that 90-day progress report or the 90-day report from the USDA on climate smart agriculture, it didn't make any mention of a USDA carbon bank, but there still seems to be chatter about that. And interestingly, Robert Bonney, who was mentioned earlier as well, he's the candidate to be in charge of climate programs for USDA, and his Senate confirmation hearing is actually later this week. And so I don't know, I guess I left this on here as a topic to watch because I don't know, he's been a huge proponent of carbon banks for the USDA, for the last 6 months. And so I don't know if him being officially confirmed will change any of his goals or desires, but maybe something to continue to watch. Also, the Paris Agreement, I'm not going to go into detail on that since we already talked about that. Basically, another thing to watch is, will there be a development of some sort of international carbon market? And then another thing is defining some terms here. So additionality and carbon leakage are some terms that haven't really been defined. And these relate to, what could happen if, basically, we need to make sure that the practices that are getting counted as carbon capture are something that haven't been done before. They have to be new things. We have to be capturing new levels of carbon to really get to that climate neutral level. And how do we define that? And then also, if you're growing corn in central Illinois and then you decide to completely change your practice and do something different, or maybe you put your land in CRP, there could be a farmer in some other country that picks up that amount of corn that you had been producing and starts producing corn, but you were doing it in a more carbon neutral way or a more environmentally friendly way than they might be. And so then we have that problem where, yes, we took some land out of production here, and we're not talking about a single farm, but I'm using that as an example. If we take mass amounts out of land out of production here, will some other part of the world start producing that? And then maybe they're doing it in a less sustainable way than we were, and then we run into some problems. And then climate-related legislation, what happens with that Growing Climate Solutions Act, and then in addition to that, other types of climate legislation that maybe aren't agriculture specific, but could impact agriculture. Climate seems to be woven into everything that's proposed, as I'm sure those of you who follow that have seen. So with that, I am going to wrap up. Again, thanks on behalf of the three of us for having us here today. And I know that there's a bit of time later for some questions, and we're down to only a couple minutes, but I'm going to have to leave and won't be here. So I guess maybe I could say if anyone has any questions specifically about what I've talked about, do we have a minute or two for that? Okay.
Question.
Yes.
So in your opinion, if the voluntary methods aren't successful in some reasonable time period, will regulation step in?
I suppose that would happen eventually. I think that there seems to be a lot of support. I think that Growing Climate Solutions Act that was passed so strongly in the Senate, and the USDA report that also showed support for incentives and providing, really pushing for that independent carbon marketplace. I think those are strong signals from the government that they're really wanting to see this be a voluntary incentive-based type of thing.
So a follow-up to that. If some form of regulation comes, again, your opinion, as we sit here today, do you think the regulation would come to farmers to adopt more practices, or would the regulation come on those who are putting the carbon into the atmosphere, and that would drive the financial success of the carbon market?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that. Both of those are definitely possibilities. I think that that would really depend on, I guess, the approach that Congress and the administration at the time that was happening would take. There's other countries that have that, requirement on companies to reduce their emissions, or they can only emit a certain amount. So then they are either needing to invest in changes to their practices, or they're needing to buy markets. Like we talked to a company in Canada that talked a lot about how that's functioning there. And so yes, that could definitely maybe come at it from the other way and then push the market to be more successful. What we don't really know at this point is what's the equilibrium point for these carbon markets. I mean, Gary talked some about the economics, and from the farmer perspective, where's the break even? And we're not to that point yet, but how high can we go to make it worthwhile for farmers before companies just make their own investments to make changes on their end? And we don't really know where that point falls yet, but definitely if there was a government regulation on those companies, it would, pull that, it would strengthen the demand for our, carbon capture at the farm level. Is there any other questions? Yes?
When you talked about commoditizing carbon trading, and you said one of the problems was undermine the process or lead to other problems, what would be some of those examples?
Well, I think a bit about what I was saying. If we're talking about, so later, just a few minutes ago, I talked about what happens when we have this global view of things. So I guess one thing that I would point out as undermining is that issue of what happens when the United States sets its goals as part of the Paris Agreement, and part of that is this 30 by 30 plan. And so then we take, we go from 12% to 30% of our land in conservation. And let's say we take more cropland out, and it's a pretty significant chunk. So then, will the world markets respond? And maybe we see places like Africa or South America expanding their production. And then we have, some issues because the same amounts being produced when we look at a global perspective, and maybe they're not doing it as sustainable as we were. And so that's where you can run into some problems when you're having things on a global level. So there's some countries who are arguing that perspective, and there's others that are arguing a global approach and the global market could help achieve working together. Okay.
Kristen,
Yes.
you think about the timeline that you shared on what has already happened, and then think about what might be happening next. Is the $3 trillion plan that we hear about in the news that supposedly is going to include some climate change dollars, will that be another reset for us? Will we get more instructions on what it's going to look like after, if that is passed?
Hopefully. I think that that's kind of the boat that we're all in, is we're kind of in this area where we have options out there and kind of trying to wade through the information we have, while also knowing that there's a lot of big things coming up that could maybe change the whole ball game. So you're kind of sitting here wondering, do you get up to bat and go for it now, or do you sit back and wait and see how things evolve? And so that's kind of the big thing. And so hopefully we get some clarification. And
today is I'm helping to lead some of our sustainabilities in the eastern U.S. So for scope, for those of you who are not familiar with Cargill's structure, that is essentially anything east of the Illinois River. So Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and some of our plants in the Carolinas, Georgia. So largely integrated into the grain business, and my entire history with Cargill and in the ag industry has been on the farmer side, our origination side, and trying to take in what we've learned about farmers and what they want from Cargill, what do our demand customers want as Cargill from a carbon market, and how do we integrate that supply chain through and through. So excited to be here. I live just west of Indianapolis in Danville, Indiana, so this was a short little jaunt for me today, but in keeping with the theme, my first time being in person in a meeting in almost 2 years, so super excited to be more than a head on a screen when interacting with you guys. All right, a little bit about Cargill. I think everyone's probably heard the name Cargill, but I'd just like to throw this in there for scope. 155,000 employees, 70 countries. We've been in business 155 years, largest privately held company in the US, in 125 countries. And our Cargill Cares is a huge program. I don't know if you guys have seen it in your communities, but we do like to touch on. We have 350 local chapters of our Cargill Cares, so if you're ever looking in your community for donations, please reach out to someone at Cargill, because we do like to give back to our communities as well. So why is Cargill, this large company, getting into the carbon space? Why do we care about carbon, and why do we want to be a player in the market? And so hoping to answer that a little bit for you today, and it's twofold, right? So our global priorities are listed here on the screen. You can find this on our website. Very transparent in what we're trying to do as Cargill. And the sustainability piece fits into two factors of that. The first one being farmer livelihood, driving profitability back to the farm is something we try to do day in and day out. And then the other one is around climate change. We have made climate change commitments as Cargill ourselves to reduce greenhouse gases, and then also help our demand, that 30 by 30 customers reach their goals as well. If you guys have any questions throughout this, feel free to stop me. I'm not going to talk for 50 minutes straight. You guys will be asleep. Largely today, these practices that we talked about, we heard about this morning, around no-till, cover crops, crop diversity, and nutrient optimism, have been largely implemented by the farmer for soil health reasons, right? Most people that are implementing a cover crop today, it is for soil health benefits. They've seen the benefits to their field and on their farm, and that's why the reason they are doing them today. Do I personally think that today carbon is going to go out there and change a guy's mind to go 100% cover crop? No. We've walked through the economics. They're not there today, but they are an added benefit to the soil health practices we're doing already. This is a study we did with the Soil Health Institute, and we had 100 farmers that participated in this program, and some of the results we saw from the program were really around, again, the soil health benefits, the increase in crop resistance to weather, the increase of profitability to their farm. The fourth one from the left here around reduce the cost to grow on corn by $24 an acre and $17 an acre on beans. And then you can see all the way to the right, the increase of income per acre of $52 on corn and $45 on beans. So again, largely to date, most of these practices have been implemented for farmers' choice on what they want to do with their land and the soil benefits they're getting from them. So, a lot of what we've done today, so now where is the demand for these carbon credits coming from? And we talked about it a little bit this morning, but here are some companies in which have made commitments by the year 2050 or earlier to reduce their carbon footprint and or get to net zero. So you can see a lot of these are food customers today. You know, you have your PepsiCo, your McDonald's, your Coke, your Coors. A lot of these are agricultural-based companies in which Cargill does business with already today. So who better to help connect that supply chain than an agricultural company, which is where Cargill comes in. So we have the two customers, right? We talked about our food customers up at the top. All of these are customers who have made science-based targets by the year 2050. And in the bottom are people who are looking more as carbon as an offset, right? So your big tech companies, your big Facebook, all of those companies who have made commitments that are going to have to purchase carbon as an offset because they can't do it today as an inset, right? There's very little they can do today to reduce their carbon footprint. So in order to help with the climate change issue, they're going to have to go out and buy carbon credits from someplace. And how does Cargill fit into those supply chains, right? So we have the top, which is our already existing supply chain. Customers we're doing business with today, you know, whether it be selling oil to McDonald's to fry their fries in, or high fructose corn syrup to Pepsi to put in their Diet Pepsi. Kellogg, their corn chips, anything, you know, we're integrated through the entire food business. And so today, our goal as Cargill is to supply a better product to our customers. How do we help our already existing customers meet the commitments they've made to the reduction of carbon? And so we have made Cargill commitments ourselves. Today, we intend to resell or integrate our carbon credits we buy through our carbon program to the end customer. So again, our goal, how do we become more customer focused? How do we help our customers reach their goals when it comes to the carbon space. And then if we do have extra carbon credits at the end, we can always offset them as ourselves, or we can integrate them and sell them into some of these more offset pathways to more of the tech and gas type companies. I want to pause there around Cargill's goal. And is there any questions just around still why Cargill's in the space or what we're trying to do by being in the carbon market?
So you're, am I right here, you're doing that through the trial, that you sell them and saying that this is.
Yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying. So he's asking, are we saying, hey, PepsiCo, here is a carbon-friendly product? No, it's not gonna be, yes and no, right? That is not how we can frame it, right? Because that's not something we can tangibly say, this bushel of corn was grown on a carbon friendly field today. Like, we don't have that capability, but we can say in our footprint, we made this many carbon credits and now we can sell you those credits. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Are you saying you're going to create those carbon credits by reducing your carbon emissions as a company?
No.
And sell those?
Yeah, today we just rolled out our program, which I'll get to here in a minute, and which is paying producers to implement something like a cover crop or a no-till to sequester carbon in the soil. And then we can take and pass that on to our demand
You're going
customers.
to purchase the carbon?
Yep, absolutely.
So you're the intermediary.
Correct.
Like the producer is the one that is sequestering the carbon. You're the intermediary between them and those end purchasers.
You're merchandising it.
Yep. Which, if you think about what Cargill does, we are a trading business, right? And so carbon is another way in which we can connect that supply chain. All right. And again, I think this is just a visual, right? The farmer's goal is improving soil health today by doing these practices. Our demand customer wants to reduce their carbon footprint, and ag-based climate solutions are what brings those two together. It's been a bit of a race to the farm gate, right? We've seen a lot of these carbon programs pop up. I think you mentioned 11 that you guys have data on. Here are a few of the other ones. No lie that we're not the only one in the business, not the only one out there trying to capture some of these carbon credits. I think our sustainability lead, Ben Farger, said it best on the call the other day, that this carbon market's a little bit like the wild, wild west, right? We're all out there, we're all trying to figure it out. What we say today might not be relevant in a month from now. Cargill has been very public that we would love some regulation around what defines a carbon credit. How do we better define this market? We'd like to keep it a privately traded market to some extent, but we need a lot more regulation around what is a carbon credit, what qualifies, what doesn't qualify, because today we're taking it to our demand customers and saying, what do you want? And sending that back down through the chain to what the producer can perform. So I think some regulation around that would be fantastic and really helpful to the carbon markets in totality, but it is a little bit of the wild, wild west. We're all out here, we're trying to figure it out and trying to just bring some value to both ends of the supply chain within agriculture around this climate thing, because we do not want it to be mandated or governmentally regulated for our producers. All right, if there's no more questions around why Cargill's in the business, I'll get into what our program as Cargill looks like today. What are we tangibly offering to our farmer producers? And then again, just our goal as Cargill is 10 million producers and sustainability programs by the year 2030. So that's worldwide, not just in the US, but also we're talking about carbon here today. We have some water programs and some other things that are coming down the pipeline or are very regionally located as well. So 10 million is our goal of producers in the world. Today our program focuses on these 6 states, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Missouri, Arizona, and Tennessee. And our program, this is a local year, so we had to pick a place to start. These are areas in which we have a large presence as Cargill today, a lot of farmer-customer relationships. And so also a lot of our demand customers, one thing they said is they want to know where the carbon credit came from. And so if we open it up throughout the entire US, that is really hard to manage then on our end. So we are, and this is a very important distinction, we are paying for carbon sequestered not for doing cover crops and no-till, right? How you get there is by implementing things such as cover crop and no-till. But if we are paying for the actual amount of carbon sequestered in the soil. And so our goal is to be the most farmer-friendly program, and that is to say, a lot of programs that say you have to do no-till, right? Well, we're not saying that, so if you have to get out there and you need to turn under a small part of your field that has ruts in it, it's still your farm, you still have the option to do that, but it will reduce the amount of carbon in which you sequester in the soil, and you will get paid less. So, important distinction that we are not paying people to do no-till and cover crops, we are paying for sequestration of carbon. And then we are, I think the only one I know of today that's doing just a 1-year program. So you only have to sign up your fields for 1 year, so you can test it out, see if you like it. That will likely change in the future, but when we start thinking about the idea of permanency and that sort of stuff. But this year, as a program, we are going to try it out for a year. Helps both Cargill and our customers get their foot in the door to some of these issues. Oh, and I didn't touch on the most important part, $20 a metric ton. And then a $5 bonus for signing up in the inaugural year. So $25 per metric ton. I tell guys use about a half a ton per acre if you're trying to figure out what the math comes out to be. That is a good average for different practices. More practices you do, it'll be above that. Less practices, it'll be lower. Eligibility requirements, you must be a Cargill customer. So that is to say you have to have an account with Cargill in which we can pay you through. It is really easy to set up a Cargill account if you do not have one, but we just have to have customers who are able to get paid through our system. You must be in those 5 states in which we mentioned. So Illinois, Indiana, both close to here, qualify. You must be implementing new or expanding practices starting in the fall of 2021. So we talked a little bit this morning around everything the carbon market has stated today is we want change from today forward. And I know what I get a lot is, hey, I've been doing no-till since 1965. Why are you punishing me for good practices? And it's not that we want to punish anyone. We would love to pay everyone for bad practices, but today there's not a market for it. So if I can't go and sell a carbon credit that was created 6 years ago, I don't have a way to buy it. We're constantly looking for new and emerging markets that we can help sell those into, but just today, the market is defined as new and expanding practices, and that's what we're able to sell on the other side of the supply chain. Are there questions around that? Because I know it's going to come up. Yeah.
So just to be clear about that, if I've been doing cover crops or no-till in the past, there's no bank or no way to retroactively, but am I still eligible if I maintain those practices to enter into this market?
No, and ours is per field. So on a field, it'll have to be a new practice on that field. So if you farm 1,000 acres, you've done cover crops on 200, you're going to start it on 200 separate ones, those qualify. But the fields that it has been done on before would not qualify for a new or expanded practice. Yeah?
If your contract's for 1 year, how do you envision the next year then? If right now you have to start up, and then the next year you can't start in the field if you're really moving.
Yeah, so that's where a re-enrollment process will come in. And so you'll be eligible to re-enroll in the program since you already started your new practices with Cargill. So when our program comes out this next year.
I just didn't know how you justify that with being, a no-tiller from 2 years ago can't apply, but a no-tiller last, I guess technically, this contract year could reapply.
Correct, yep, and it's because you have started in the program with Cargill, and so once you're in the program, you can re-enroll. Yeah.
Did I understand then if you used the example of 1,000 acres, and if I've been doing no-till and cover crop on 1,000 acres, then I'm not eligible at all?
Correct, yep.
Wow.
And again, it's because we don't have a market on the other end. This is such a new and emerging market that we don't have a buyer for that today. We would love to buy them, don't get me wrong, but if we can find a customer who says, yeah, I'll pay for past practices, we would be more than happy to do that. Yeah.
So, what do you expect, and I'm not arguing with what you're doing, but you're doing what the market does, good. I would expect that carbon sequestration, I did cover crops 5 years ago, I continue to do it, I should still be sequestering carbon, right?
Yeah. If you guys can hear, his question was if I did cover crops for the last 5 years, and I continue to do them for 5 more, you would say that I'm still sequestering carbon and should be still generating a payment. I can't disagree with that logic, but again, what we have today, the rules we have to play with today, again, this could change in 2 months, or it has to be something you've started moving on that land today. So things we're trying to keep a really close pulse on, but today, we can't. Yeah.
So we've been crystal clear about the whole new versus what I've already been doing. But
Yeah.
what's expanded? Talk to me about what that expanded looks like. Is that the 200 to 400 acres in cover crops, or is there more to that?
Yeah, it could be you were doing no-till and you expand and add cover crops. You're doing reduced till and you go to no-till. So that's what we consider expanded, is additionality on the same plot of land.
So if you start new, let's say nobody's no-tilling, whatever, and you're in the program 1 year, well, you've been in 1 year, you've no-tilled for 1 year, now the second year, it's not considered being in no-till already and
Right.
continuing on? Or
Yeah, so you'll be able to
what's the
continue
difference?
in whatever program you signed up with. So if you sign up for Cargill in year 1, you can re-enroll as you're already in the program. So this is, remember, this is year 1, right? This is just our program for year 1, which has to be newer expanded practices. For year 2, then we would come with you to re-enroll that same field because you're already in Cargill's program with the new practice you started this year.
So re-enrolling sequesters carbon, but
It is. I understand that some of it doesn't make sense, and we're playing with the rules we've been given today.
the logic isn't there.
It isn't, but what we're trying to do, right, this is an inaugural program, it's year 1. I hope year 2, 3, 4, and 5, we just are better able to define this thing and pay for more and more practices that have been done over years, but today, we don't have a market for it.
But aren't you paying for carbon sequester no matter when it happens? I mean, I sequester, I enroll, I sequester,
Yeah,
I get paid for it. The next year, I keep up those practices.
yeah.
Am I paying for another amount of carbon that's being sequestered?
Yep, you'll continue to get paid as long as and we'll get into the modeling we use here in just a minute, but as long as you're still sequestering more carbon in the soil, you will qualify, just to keep re-enrolled.
And this is based on what? Paying guys to incentive to start doing something?
Yeah, so I guess
Why, what's the logic behind?
behind the new practices or
Yeah.
behind the carbon program in totality?
Yeah, what, pardon me,
Are you asking what's the point in paying people to sequester carbon, or what's the point?
in the start, yeah, getting somebody going.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this before, just the new practices are not in and of itself probably gonna pay to put out something like a cover crop, right? We do allow on the 5th point here you to stack any kind of government program on top, which gets you closer. But what we're trying to do is incentivize guys to start moving that way. There are a lot of guys who are already decided that this is the path they're going to go. Maybe pushes them over the hurdle. I'll get at the end of the slide is some of our projections of what we see this market looks like long term, and that's probably a little bit more where those larger payments will start to make more sense. Did you have a question?
I just rephrased what he was saying, like
Okay.
that was an incentive not to pay for the past years. I guess it's to get people to do it.
Yeah, and it's just, again, I don't have a way to sell it, right? Today, what the demand customer is demanding is new and expanded practices, and we continually are talking to people and trying to change that narrative, but this is a small program for year 1 and what we're able to do today. Yeah,
This one,
Just
so
one.
it's already started, you can enroll in it now, or can you still enroll in 2021?
yes, we're enrolling through September 15th.
Oh, that's for next year.
Yes, and so
Okay,
this
I'm
is
sorry.
first practices, we're gonna start fall of 2021, and we'll go all the way through the cycle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this will be for 2022.
Correct, 2021's fall, so 2022 crop. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, okay.
What qualifies for early sign-up?
Essentially, this, until our program is full, will be the early sign up. So we have a set amount of acres we're trying to capture between now and the end. All right, in the interest of time, we can come back to this topic if you want, but I just want to push through, because I know it is a big question. There's no minimum or maximum acreage requirement within the Cargill program, so you can sign up 50 acres, you can sign up 5,000 acres. And then you can't be dual enrolled in another private program, so you cannot do 2 carbon programs. You can't do Cargill's program and Indigo's program, but you can do Cargill's program if you're choosing some sort of FSA program to put on top of that. You're more than welcome to. What I really want to touch on in this slide is that bottom part. How is carbon sequestration calculated? And we talked a little bit earlier this morning that it's not a cut and dry equation. We're not paying for cover crops, we're paying for the sequestration. And so Cargill has paired with fluorescents, which regrow is the modeling system in which we are labeled under Cargill. And it takes into account a lot of different things down to weather of how much carbon you're going to sequester into the ground. But crop type, tillage use, fertilization plans, historical weather data, and soil type all are some of the factors that go into that. And then again, we just, if we're talking in broad terms, try to use that 0.5 ton per acre because it seems to be a good average for guys in changing practices. We've also partnered because I am not an agronomist, I'm more of an economist. And so we've partnered with Practical Farmers of Iowa, a group in which anyone in our program is welcome to reach out to with questions around cover crops and more specific tillage practices that are good for their individual land. So a benefit you get through Cargill is a relationship with them as well. FarmRise is a company in which helps farmers find government funding. So if you're looking for some of those things to stack on top of your carbon program, they're a great resource to help you find those for your individual plot of land. And then, as I mentioned, Regrow is our satellite imaging company in which we use to calculate these things. This is from the Regrow website. You're welcome to go out there. They have a lot of good resources. I have a general understanding of how the model works, but when it gets into the technical details, again, I'm not an agronomist, I'm not a mathematician, and that we really lean on them for those questions. And so what we're doing is we're taking satellite imagery combined with a 5-year history of what you've done on that piece of land. So that includes crop grown, tillage practice, fall and spring, and then if you did a cover crop or not on that piece of land over the last 5 years. When it pops up on the screen, it'll say what the satellite feels like was done. Then you go in and confirm those practices, whether that is correct or not. That gives us a baseline of where carbon should be close to at in your ground. Then we go through the growing year. Satellite imagery will calculate how long the cover crop was on your ground, how much carbon that led to sequestration, what tillage practices were done, and what was weather like in your area. I think our program, we pay half of it after the fall practices are done. So once you put in your plot of land, it might say you're going to sequester. We'll just use again that 0.5 for easy math on that land. So you would get half of that payment once you do your no-till practice, if that's what you choose to do, or reduce till in the fall, or get your cover crop planted. And then once we verify throughout the entire season, and it's a verified carbon credit, you'll receive the second half of payment. And so this is a reminder too that Cargill is not going to have these credits to trade. They aren't going to become full credits until almost December of 2023. And if you think about a little bit of a risk in what can change between now and December of 2023. Again, why we put some of these things into place is to protect the House of Cargill as well, because we don't know what regulation will look like by that time. We're doing our best. Yeah?
Quick question. You said you have a 5-year history.
Mm-hmm.
Are you paying credits based off the implemental change that you're doing on your farm for this calendar year? Or is it based off the whole farm? So as in, since you changed to, like, say, add cover crops, are you paying just for that cover crop portion, or for that whole farm operation on that field?
Well, yeah, we'll pay for whatever you decided to enroll in. So if you enrolled in no-till and cover crops, we can verify that that is what you did on the field,
okay,
right? We will pay you. So if you enroll 50 fields, we'll pay you all in one chunk. I don't know if that was the question. But we pay you for the actual amount of of carbon sequestered based on the model.
Okay, well, I guess my question was, you're based off the expanded amount of sequestration, I don't know how to pronounce that word.
Yeah.
but Based off the 5-year history, what you gained on that? Based
Yeah.
off the 5 years?
Yep, I think I got you. So your 5-year history gives a baseline for where your land is today. And then you will implement the new practices and we will have a new number for where your land is after.
Okay,
So the difference between the two is what you will receive in payment.
that's what I was thinking about.
Okay.
Thanks.
What if you just purchase the land and you don't have a 5-year track record?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the satellite imaging will pop up what it thinks was done. Your job is to verify it. So again, you're gonna wanna verify it to the best of your ability so that we can get that good baseline. Yes?
Do producers that are enrolled in your program have access to the satellite imagery for their acres?
Throughout the year, so it looks like, if anyone's been in like Climate Sense, it looks like plots of land. You hop in there, you select your field. You can also upload it from My John Deere or whatever you use. And then at the end of the year, your land will still be in there, but you're not like watching the satellite imagery, if that's the question.
Just to get a snapshot of what's going on is what
Yeah.
I'm interested in, whether or not that is transparent to producers or not.
It can be at the end. I don't think if you log in throughout the year, you're not gonna see here's your cover crop.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Interested. Cool.
Because I think we touched on this morning, there's gonna be a lot of questions around, is this correct? And I think that goes back to the verification. So we're using satellite imagery, but about 10% of our fields will actually be sampled and verified to make sure that we are on the right track.
So
Yeah.
only 10% will be sampled, so this, you're paying on practice and model results, not on soil carbon tests.
Correct, yep, today. And again, where we need more regulations, what does define this? What does the practice have to look like? They have done a ton of research. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're the premier carbon sequestration calculator in Europe, who is a little bit ahead of us. And so part of the reason we chose to partner with them is they have a lot of experience in this modeling. All right, let's pause there. Any other questions around carbon credits or what Cargill's program looks like? All right, I put in.
There's a question.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I working on the wording, I'm still, but I choose to implement a practice, for example, this fall.
Mm-hmm.
I get paid half of my credits, on the timeline that you mentioned. But because of scalability or something that it doesn't fall through for the full 2-year process and I have to make operational changes, how does something like that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an act of God clause, force majeure in our contract. So say we have a really, really wet fall and you're not able to plant a cover crop. We understand you just will not get that second half of your payment, right? Something happens, you sell a piece of land, right? Well, we're more than willing to work with people to try to transfer that to a different field. Do you want to cancel out of the program, much like you would cancel out of a contract with Cargill on the grain side? We have processes around that. Again, we want to be farmer friendly. We want you to still be able to make the choices that are best for your land. We're not going to say, sir, you have to go out and plant rye this year because that's the cover crop we chose for your ground, right? It's you do your practices and that's going to result in some sort of carbon payment at the end of the day based on what you sequester. You want to till inrows for compaction? Great. It's gonna reduce your payment a little bit at the end of the day, though. All right. What is the future of ag-based carbon credits? And I just put a huge question mark on the screen because no one really knows, right? This is, again, it's the wild, wild west. We're all out here. We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to decide what is best for us as a company, what's the best for our customers on both ends of the supply chain, but there's not a lot of definition around it. With that being said, we have run some models of what we think carbon credit market could look like in the next, 5 to 50 years. And I think that if I stood up here tomorrow, it would probably look substantially different just because that's how fast things are trading. But today I wanted to throw some things out in front of you so it wasn't just this arbitrary market out there. Today we're estimating the demand for carbon credits is expected to increase by over 15 times by the year 2030 and up to 100 times by the year of 2050. So internal estimates of what we think the future of this looks like. The overall market size is expected to be between 5 billion to 180 billion. A little bit of a range there. But again, it all depends on this last part, depending what demand signals and buyers are willing to do. And I think there was a question earlier around, do we think that it will be put on the end user to pay down through the supply chain more? And that is going to depend a lot on that, because I think that was a great answer, that if it gets to a certain, there's a price point, right, in which it is too much and the customer will look to do some other things. I know we're a partner with Valero in Linden, Indiana, and they're looking at ways to sequester carbon in the ground because of rock formation there. So there are companies looking at other ways to do it. This is not, farming practices are not going to be the be-all, see-all that reduce carbon in our atmosphere from an agricultural standpoint. And then I do really feel Cargill's uniquely positioned in this market to really connect the farmer and demand customer. There are a few other companies in which have that wide breadth of customer base and can really drive value directly from one end to the other. And then, we already have a robust portfolio of products that we try to offer to our farmers, and things like carbon are just another additive that we can help drive profitability back to the farm, which at the end of the day is Cargill's goal. Questions around these semi-vague points around the economist field? Yeah.
While we're on the vague topic, I'll go ahead and throw the question out there. We've kind of beat the whole new versus old practices, we beat that horse to death. But if you were going to stare into your crystal ball and say whether market-based or policy-based, this concept of a carbon bank that may be able to recapture some of this historic sequestration, do you care to handicap a likelihood or even a time frame that you think that could become a reality?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, right? Because
we're not going to hold you liable.
Can we turn off the camera for a second? I'm just kidding. Yeah, and so again, it's going to come back today, and how private the market is. The demand customer is going to drive a lot of those decisions today. If we think about some of the other things that have come through agriculture, organic, non-GMO, there were things like the butterfly that came in and really put a wrap around what does it mean to be non-GMO, right? There is nothing in that in the organic space or in the carbon space today that really defines a carbon credit. And so I think that is step one in fixing this issue of when do we become what. I would hope it's in the next 10 to 15 years if I had to put a mark on it, but I can't. What's current administration going to do? What else is going to pop up that helps reduce carbon emissions? There's a lot of factors. Yeah.
I understand this is the first year of your program, correct?
Yes.
Have you started to see any models of the demand for it?
The demand from our demand customers?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I hit a little bit on some of our customers who are already in that market, and almost all of the demand we've seen today has been from food customers on the other end. So I'm going to give examples. None of these are like set in stone that I'm saying are Cargill's customers, but PepsiCo, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, have all made really big commitments to the carbon space, and they're going to have to find ways in which to do that. Step one is going to be try to offset it themselves. Step two is how can we get it throughout the supply chain. So again, most of our demand is coming from our larger ag companies.
Are there numbers you can put in these demands yet?
Yeah, so let me go back a few slides.
I apologize if you did on there.
No, you're fine. I think I hit on it at a high level, but I didn't say, hey, Target is going to decrease by X percent. So if we look at the top, these are beyond net zero customer or commitments made by companies. So you'll see up there, there's Walmart, IKEA, Unilever, Microsoft. They have all made commitments today to take their carbon footprint below zero, right? I don't know what IKEA's carbon footprint is today. I would imagine it's not small, right? And if we think about the entirety of carbon, we talked about this morning, agriculture and farming is only going to be about 10% of it, right? So they're going to have to go outside of even agriculture to help offset these carbon credits. Yep.
Cargill deals in products, corn and related to farmers, farm corn and beans around here.
Yeah.
Those are things are tangible.
Mm-hmm.
You can handle them, you can dry them, you can store them. But you're talking about things that are invisible out there. How do you?
It is there, right? We can take a soil sample and we can say, here's the amount of carbon in your soil today, and here's the amount of carbon in your. It is a little bit hard to wrap your hand around because it is just a credit, but carbon is sequestered in the soil and we can measure that.
Very, very different.
Do you have a comment on that, or do you have a question?
Oh, no, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a fees structure? I mean, do you take fees for natural loss of carbon or administrative fees or the soil test fees?
Nope,
For the...
absolutely not. That's all built into our program. So today there's no fee or anything associated with being in Cargill's program. You just $20 a ton plus that $5 bonus.
And you'll get an estimate of what that is before you sign up.
Correct, yep, and you'll get half of that payment. That half of that payment is guaranteed, and then based on what you do, you get the second half of the payment. Yeah.
So if I want to sign up, how do I do that?
Regrow.cargill.com, or .ag, I'm sorry. I should have put that on the slide. That's a big miss on my part. But yes, the Regrow website at Cargill. You can also get to our sustainability page within the homepage, and I'll make sure I get that to the team as well. It's free to, you do have to have a Cargill account number to sign into that, and so once you get in there, you can pick a field, you can say these are the practices I'm going to do on it, and it'll tell you the estimate of carbon sequestered on that field. Yeah?
What other businesses are selling their carbon credits?
There's a lot of players in the market today. So we are a little bit different, as I think we're the only ag company or grain company really in the program. Oh, here it is. Corteva has a pretty big one. Bayer has a pretty big one. Truterra is Land O'Lakes. And then the rest of them are less tangibly ag related. Nutrient, but I would say Indigo Nori, less directly tied into the ag business.
So these are other than agriculture?
No, these are all agriculture. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. We're getting other credits, forestry credits, offset credits. We're not in that business today. I don't know who the competitors are there, but there are other larger companies creating credits from other things.
But forestry is kind of agriculture, right?
Yeah, just not a space we're playing in as Cargill today. Yeah.
So what are they?
I don't know who the forestry players are today. As Cargill, we're not in that industry, so.
Other than agriculture?
Other than agriculture, who is?
Selling carbon credits.
Yeah, so carbon credit has to be formulated by something, right? And we're doing it in farmland. There's forestry, and then most of the other ones that are large are more offsets. So companies reducing the amount of greenhouse that's coming out of their facilities and their plants through manufacturing and that sort of stuff.
Agriculture.
Yep. I think there was another question in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about the $20 price. Is that gonna fluctuate like as demand grows with these companies and things, or are you locked in if you re-enroll in that program?
Yeah, another great question. The reason why we decided on a one-year program, we have the hypothesis that price will probably go up in the coming years, and so we want to remain that flexibility on both sides to be able to pay the producer more.
Yeah, so in a sense, like you don't want to sign up a majority of your acres yet. You might be shooting yourself in the foot, just kind of wait and see, or?
It depends. If you're already planning on changing practices, you want to get in a program today. Again, because then you won't qualify for that new and expanding practices. So if you're already thinking about planting cover crops on some new ground, you should enroll in the program this year.
Yeah, kind of a two-part question, but what is the current market for carbon right now? You talk about a $5 billion to $180 billion market in 2030. what is it right now? Because we can correlate that to $20 an acre. What does it look like in 2030? Is there any type of information you can give us or thoughts on what that amounts to per acre for farmers in 2030 if it's that large?
No, because again, it's going to largely determine on the demand side what they're willing to pay for and then what regulations are wrapped around that. So again, how much more of it's given from the demand side, how much more is regulated on the farmer side, and where do we hit that threshold? I could throw a number out there, but it would be largely incorrect in 2 months from now. So I would say keep your pulse on that. I would say our website, our sustainability website, we update it often as new regulations, new things come out. So if you're looking for a place to keep your pulse on it, it's out there. Yeah.
I apologize, but is it in the legislation, does it determine these companies what percentage has to come from them doing it themselves versus going outside?
There's nothing today that regulates that, no.
No, so they can be determined by them.
Yep, they've made their commitments and it's up to them to get there however they see fit.
We're going to conclude our program with a farmer panel discussion. My name is Casey McClure. I'm the regional manager at the Mahomet branch office. I'm going to be your moderator today, and so as we were developing this program, we knew we wanted to touch on the policy side, the economic side, but then ultimately, as we've learned today, all of which is going to be ultimately tied to production practices. So it's only logical to have a discussion with some folks who are currently doing some things. Now they may be rethinking a little bit of that maybe after this whole carbon credit concept, but I remain optimistic as a producer myself that there will be a program, carbon bank, whatever you want to call it, for that will reward those past practices. But regardless, every operation has to choose for themselves what fits and what's best, and evaluate all these opportunities. There's clearly going to be opportunities ahead of us, and so we wanted to talk about some production practices that people are doing today and their experiences with those to just further inform and educate you guys and just be prepared for when those opportunities are right, whether that's $20 a metric ton or $30 a metric ton, and stacking that on top of potentially some federal programs. We wanted to have that conversation around the production side of this and just give you some information to consider. So with that, I'm going to just kind of go down the line here. Our first guest is Derek Martin. He's from over in the Sangamon County area. Logan, Sangamon. He does some stuff with composting, I understand. So Derek, just tell us a little bit about your operation and some of those practices that you're doing.
Yeah, my name is Derek Martin. Live in Mount Pulaski, Illinois, Logan County. I farm with my brother, Doug, and my dad, Jeff. He's sort of retired, but my brother and I farm in Logan, Sangamon, and Macon. Strictly strip-till, no-till, corn and soybeans. Have been big proponents of soil health for years. Actually starts with my dad, who started no-tilling in like 1984, and everybody thought he was crazy then. And the stuff my brother and I are doing on our farm, people think we're crazy too. It all evolves from, we're big proponents of soil health and conservation. We do cover crops. As he had said, we do composting. We work with a company, Systems. We have our own extractor, where we take a compost and extract all the beneficial bacteria and fungi out of that compost into a liquid solution and apply it to our soils in the spring and the fall. Along with that, we also focus on other micronutrients and things that we haven't focused on for decades, with the end goal improving our soil health, our grain quality, and because we believe in this and we've seen good results from this, is why we do it. Things like carbon credits and higher nutrient value of our grain is just an added bonus to what we're already doing in our operation today.
So Derek, I've got a little compost pile out behind the shed from the garden. I know you mix greens and browns in certain quantities, but it's a little more scientific than that. Not to get too deep in the weeds, but I'm curious.
It's very complex. You get out of it what you put in it, And so obviously diversity is key in anything, even like a cover crop situation. The more diverse cover crops you have, the more things you get benefit. We've got over 4,000 beneficial bacteria and fungi that we know of in the compost tea.
It's a lot of bugs.
It's a lot of bugs. We actually have a microscope on our farm, and we actually look at our own soil and identify anaerobic versus aerobic and all that stuff. So yeah, it's basically, I wish now I maybe should have taken some more science classes at U of I when I was here. So, but yeah, it's just like they explained on the carbon market. It's ever changing. We learn something new every day, and just got to keep rolling.
Yeah, so, this is a kind of practices and project that's unique. It's not going to be for everybody, but is there any scalability to what you're doing?
Absolutely, and the most important thing is it takes time. We didn't destroy our soils in 1 year. We're definitely not going to fix them in 1 year. On some of our farms, we've seen a turnaround in net profitability in 1 year. Some it's taken 5. But along those lines, with what we have done, we see a net savings in nitrogen now. The old industry standard was 1.1 units of N per bushel. We're down to 0.6, 0.7. We think we can get to 0.5. We actually have grown some 200 bushel corn on 0 units of N. But we don't treat our soybeans anymore. We don't see the need for that. We've proven that we don't have and seen where our neighbors will have diseases and we don't. We've used fungicide, we've cut back on P&K, concentrated on other things that we've done. And so it's not necessarily a net savings in the beginning. It's spending that same money you've always spent and spending it differently. If you think back, our agronomist has the best analogy. For years in the farming community, we focused on P&K. If you can imagine eating a Big Mac every day, you're going to be deficient in something. And so,
That's a great analogy. It's a great analogy. So there's potentially some scalability there. Now, it's clear you guys have kind of been focused on some different practices for a long time. This is a multi-generational focus on soil health and no-till and so forth. Fairly unique in that regard. A lot of folks out there are still kind of what we would think of as traditional agriculture, whether that's conventional tillage or reduced tillage. It all kind of, I would say, still fits in that traditional mold. Any advice you give to someone out there who's kind of on the fence about, man, I'm scared about doing cover crops or a different tillage practice? How to make that leap?
my advice is obviously you want to start small, whether it's a 40 acre or an 80 acre. And give it more than 1 year. We all know we're all in the same industry today. And if you look at the last 5 years, not 1 year has been the same. And so you got to give things more than 1 year. So, pick an 80, pick a 40, and just stick with the program. Give it a chance. And, as far as things like cover crops go, my best recommendation is, now we're into a multi-species, from 4 to 6 different species mix. Start out simple. Start out, what fits your operation? Is it something that winter kills, like oats or and radishes, and then go to oats and clover and get into your more diverse mixes? I've seen a lot of people, in ourselves included, we've had mishaps on our farm as well, as trying to annual rye. Everybody says annual rye is the greatest thing ahead of corn, and then they go plant annual rye ahead of corn, and it turns out to be the worst crop they ever had. I mean, you can do those things, but that's a whole nother level of management. Start simple, give it a chance, and give it time.
There's a saying we like to use where you crawl, walk, run.
That's right.
Crawl.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Well, thanks, Derek. We'll have some time at the end for some questions here. Shane Bailey's our next panelist here. Shane farms over in the Vermilion County area. He is either all certified organic or in transition, correct, Shane?
All the ground we currently farm is either certified or in the late stages of transition. So yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started in organic. I mean, it seems like every neighborhood has that organic guy, right? You know, when I grew up in the southern part, say I'm south of Route 16 guy, and in my neighborhood, we'll protect the innocent. Marty was the organic guy, and he had his goats and he had his organic fields, and everybody kind of just, you know, he was that guy. But, you know, now I think a lot of people, when you pull them aside and you talk about organic, when you're talking about, what, $26, $23, $26 beans, people are taking it serious now. So how'd you get there?
Sure. We started transitioning some ground back in 2016. And to be completely honest about it, I got into it because I'm a smaller scale farmer, and I wanted to add value and increase revenue on our farm without necessarily increasing our land base. And so we looked at it and looked at the price per bushel that they offer. And it's like, wow, let's take a little bit closer look at this. And you know, we were longtime no-tillers, and so getting into organic, you know, it's very tillage based. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, we've been no-till for so long, this is going to be hard to get back into it. But the longer we looked at it, and we did start off small, did one field, and then after that we basically did the whole farm. We're small for 1 year, and then we said, if we're going to do it, let's just do it. You know, we've really learned a lot about right time, right place, tillage, cover cropping. We did cover crops before we started transitioning to no-till, or transitioning to organic rather. But now, you know, we go back, you know, we're seeing the multi-species mixes and just the right timing and the right place.
So one theme I'm picking up already, as I hear both of you guys talk, is there's a generational component to it, and maybe even a community component to this, to where you're, you know, bouncing ideas off of other people. You know, to go at this alone, it's a little scary. It's scary. Farming's scary enough, but having somebody there, whether a father, a mentor, or something. So did you have anybody in particular who you kind of leaned on, you know, as an advisor in this process?
Yeah, I mean, a huge part of it was going to conferences and workshops and meetings, and you know, the organic farming space is kind of a small one, so you get to meet a lot of people and get a lot of great ideas off that. But you know, I farm with my dad, and he's a big part of that. We bounce ideas off of each other all the time, but we have a different dynamic where normally it's the young guy that comes up with all the crazy ideas, and the older generation's like, hold on a minute. Well, with my dad and I, it's the exact opposite. He's the one coming up with crazy ideas, whether we're looking at growing peas or sunflowers, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And I'm like, well, hold on a minute. Let's think about it for a second before we commit an 80 to it.
He's running, and while you're still kind of that crawl.
Exactly. He's hit the ground running all the time. But having someone to bounce ideas off of or talk to is really a crucial part in a lot of this cover crops, and more specifically the organic space.
Anything, looking back now, you've been doing this how many years?
This will be I believe the fifth growing season.
Okay, so your fifth crop. Mm-hmm. You know, is there any one thing, if you could tell yourself 5 years ago, give yourself some advice? Is there any one or a couple things you would have told yourself, knowing now?
Sure, gosh, I will say that my experience with organic farming is kind of like learning how to fly the plane when it's in the air. So it's been, you know, very much trial by fire, but I guess my thing is patience is a huge one. especially when we're talking about soil health. That is not, it does not happen overnight or even in 1, 2, or 3 years. So it's very tough. I tell myself just be patient and wait.
Okay, great advice for us all, regardless of farming. All right. Thank you, Shane. Eric runs our third panelist here. Eric's in the southern part of Champaign County. Eric, I understand you've been doing strip till now for some time, and also doing some studies with our friends at the U of I. So can you tell us a little bit about your operation?
Yeah, we farm right south of town here, in DeSoto, about 20 minutes out. And we've been strip tilling, no tilling since 1980-some, 1990. So when we first started and first did it, my dad's pretty tolerant, but he asked if, do you think we're going to do that again next year? And that made me get serious about doing it right. And it's been a learning process, but it's been very rewarding. No-till beans, strip-till corn is a pretty easy thing to do now. Equipment's better, seeds are better, planters are much better, and all that makes it possible. But back 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we started growing miscanthus. We back up a little bit. We've got one farm that's got a piece of ground with a stream running through it, and on either side of that, we put in CRP. But there was more land that we could farm, but at the time, the University of Illinois was working on their energy farm, where they grow, and they still do, grow all sorts of grasses and trees, and looking for sources of biomass that they could convert to ethanol. That was the thing back then, was ethanol was in demand, and the price was high. And we decided that if we're going to produce ethanol, and farmers are going to produce ethanol, looking at the U of I's studies, you could produce more ethanol per acre, do it cheaper than you could with corn. So I said, well, let's learn how to do that. And we planted, now we've got 40 acres of miscanthus on this poor grounds where we started. And the market for ethanol, more or less, has gone away. The better market now is other uses for the biomass. And today our market is turkey bedding, that pays the best. But you can also burn it. You can replace wood chips with it in boilers, and the objective is to use it at the university anyway. We participated in finding a boiler out there that they could use it to heat their greenhouses as part of their office space with any of the biomasses they grow. And you can heat for half the cost of LP gas at the time. But it takes a big operation. You gotta have a big use for it, like a hog house, turkey building, those big uses. So that's what we concentrate on. Miscanthus is a perennial grass, so once you plant it, you're kind of committed for a while. Ours has been growing 12 years and without replanting, and it makes it competitive with corn and soybeans. Until this last year where we had not crazy, but for ordinary prices for corn and beans.
Let's hope so.
You can make just as much, if not more, with the miscanthus than we could corn or soybeans. So it became more or less a third crop rather than just an oddball crop. So we've been growing that. One of the problems with it is we've been growing corn for how many hundreds of years, and we've been studying that for a good 100 years up here at the university, but we haven't got many years under our belt for studying miscanthus. And some problems will come up. You're on your own, you're learning And it kind of makes it fun, really. It's something new. So, to go on with what you said of the studies, and it kind of ties in with this greenhouse, the greenhouse gases, the carbon credits. Just this year, university is down on our farm. They've taken an 80 from us and 80 from the neighbor, or 2 other neighbors around us. And we farm no-till, strip-till. Our neighbors are more conventional tillage, and another neighbor is more or less a mix of the two. And I've had kids out in that cornfield, 20 of them at a time. Different cars come and go. They're out there, they're studying the gases that are released, the way we farm it, strip-till, no-till, to determine if the way we farm increases or decreases the amount of carbon released. Not sequestered in the case of carbon credits like Cargill was talking about, but this is how much carbon do we create with different kinds of farming.
Production.
Yeah, production, right.
Run tractor up and down the field.
Exactly, like the type of fertilizer, timing, all those things. We've got another study on different biomass crop of sorghum that's supposed to compete with miscanthus. We've got a test going on the nitrogen applications on miscanthus, how it affects. And I've even had a couple of kids down there studying bats and how do they survive in the corn soybean environment that is throughout Illinois. But that's fun, but the one I'm really interested in is this, and the more we hear about it, is the amount of carbon, or greenhouse, not just carbon, but greenhouse gases that are emitted from the way we farm. So.
Very interesting stuff. I'm going to ask one question, and I'm going to open it up, and hopefully we have a few more questions out there in the audience. But I think Gary may have touched on it a little bit in his presentation. We focused a lot of our conversation today around actual sequestration of carbon, but we also know nutrient management is a big part of this topic. And as Gary mentioned, you know, what ends up down in the Gulf, and just I'm trying to read the tea leaves myself. I can only imagine that that's going to continue to be a big component of this discussion, certainly from a policy standpoint. You know, with strip-till, there is some nutrient management benefits. Can you speak to us any about what you've seen, experienced with the strip-till program, and has there been any benefits and reduction in you know, nutrient costs and better management?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you.
Okay.
We ran a comparison of soil applied P&K mainly in the fall. We spread it on top and we injected it. And I say we, it wasn't me, it was Dan Schaefer working with the Fertilizer Institute. And with a professor from the U of I, checking were you better off strip-tilling it, applying that fertilizer in a hot zone, basically right underneath the seed. And we could do this now because we had RTK guidance. You couldn't do that 12, 15 years ago. It was impossible. That kind of technology has given us so many opportunities. But we did that for 10 years straight. And they measured yield, of course, they measured nutrient runoff, and comparing injecting it in the ground versus broadcast on top. And they also measured root mass every 7.5 inches across the rows. And as a result, there was no yield difference between injecting it, P&K in the soil, versus broadcasting on top and then strip-tilling. There was an advantage to strip-till, but none for injecting P&K.
Okay.
So I mean, all that money and time and effort we spend hauling fertilizer out to nurse that strip-till bar and keep it maintained, as it turned out, after 10 years of these trials, this isn't one thing we tried for 3 years and did it. This was 10 years. Yield was no difference. There was a yield difference if you stripped it or not. So we continue stripping it. And that kind of flies in the face of injecting fertilizer in the ground. I think if you're on a nice flat dirt like we are, that's not a problem. If you're on a hillside, injecting it is better.
Yeah, we didn't have any black dirt where I grew up. That's why we raised dogs. Well, thank you, Eric. Amy, what's our shot clock look like?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. We'll let the tape run as long as we need to, but who has another question? Yes, sir.
I'm interested to hear suggestions on best results they've gotten with different ways to seed cover crops.
Okay, so the question is cover crop seeding. I personally had the fertilizer guy blend it with the fertilizer and go out and broadcast it, and then we rolled it in. But I'm also curious. Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I can. I know we started that way, blended it with fertilizer, but as we got down the path and started eliminating P and K, that created a problem. So we tried some with the airplane, which is very expensive. We had success with the fertilizer and incorporating. We had success with the airplane in corn. Airplane in the beans, we had a little bit of a tougher time. But the way we do it on our farm now is we have a vertical tillage tool, Turbo Max from Great Plains, and we have an air seeder on it. And it's very minimal tillage. We run it very shallow. We incorporate it all in one pass right there. And so that's how we do it. That's what works best on our farm, and it's definitely more economical than flying it on with an airplane.
More expensive. I see Shane kind of shaking his head. You similar experience?
Yeah, very similar. We've tried broadcasting, we've done the aerial applications, and by far and large, the most consistent method that we've seen is we have a no-till drill that we run. And you're limited if you have a late harvest or something. Sometimes we're out there a lot later than we'd like to be, drilling rye or whatever. But it's just, but by far the drill has been the most consistent method of planting.
There's a lot of different species. Derek, you talk about the mixes. I think wheat or rye, cereal rye is kind of the starter, right? If you want to dip your toe in, you do a little bit of rye. Any of you guys, Eric, you want to offer anything here too? From whether it be red clover, rye, have you seen any variation on the application? Which application is best based on that species, or is it just pretty universal? If you have the ability to drill it, that's really going to be the way to go regardless of species.
I think seed to soil contact is the most important thing, whether it be through a drill or through an air seeder or a tillage tool. The biggest challenge we have, and I think it's the challenge we all share, is where we geographically lie in the timing of the species that you can get. Around here, cereal rye is a good one because you can plant it late into October. I mean, we've planted a lot of rye where it's barely came up and then the spring has taken off. On our farm, we've, just like a lot of other people, started to plant beans first, and we plant early beans first. And we did this year, we had some 2/8 we planted first. And not only are they our best yielding bean, but the idea behind it is that maybe we can get some cover crops on ahead of corn that we want. Radishes, barley, some stuff that you probably need planted by the 15th of September in Central Illinois to get a good growing day.
Otherwise, you're winter kill and you're not going to produce enough biomass to really do much good.
I'm a newcomer to cover crops. And it's always hard, the expense, first of all, of the planting. It's gotta make economic sense for me.
Yeah.
And then the timing of the plant. Well, this year, there's another group from the U of I, kids, that have got a project with robots that'll go down between 30-inch grow corn and scatter seed over 3 rows. This is the theory. Now, we're gonna come down and try it on corn this year and turn 4 or 5 these little things loose and they'll.
See if you can get that seed distributed while you're still
Yeah, the
staying crop.
advantage is it's not in that, an airplane or high boy scatters it in the canopy, it takes twice the amount of seed.
Yeah.
This way, and this way they can plant it early August and still get enough rains hopefully during that time to get the crop established. So we're gonna try it that way.
That'd be interesting. Let's
You
come out and
guys-
see that.
I'll be talking to you guys about cover crops.
All right, I'll take one more question if anybody has a question. Yes, sir.
I want to ask these 3 fellow farmers a carbon question. I come pretty ignorant here today, and the way it sounds, there's a soil test to measure the carbon in the soil. So if I'm correct about that, my first question is it good to build the carbon in the soil or bad? And the reason I'm skeptical is for instance, can't think of the chemical, what we used to get from the smokestacks.
Sulfur dioxide.
Sulfur.
Yeah.
Sulfur.
We're gonna have to start buying sulfur because we're running clear out of it, because we're not getting any free anymore. So that's kind of what generates my question. Is it good to build the carbon in the soil or not?
So I will answer that. First off, all life forms are carbon based. So is it worth building carbon? Yes. 97% of a corn plant is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The other 3% is made up of all the other elements, P and K, N, whatever. Carbon is key. So not only is it good for greenhouse emissions, but it's the base of all plant life on this on this planet. Carbon is the key to success. So the more carbon you can have, think of it related to organic matter. The higher organic matter you have, the better nutrient cycling you have, and that's all carbon based. So we need as much carbon as we can from a farmer and from a farmer's perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that.
Thank you.
Great
I didn't
question.
know.
Yep, and to answer your sulfur question, I know one thing we use gypsum
Yeah, right.
for our sulfur because of the getting free.
I have not.
That's how we attack our.
I have not, but I knew that.
Yeah.
Okay. If there's no further questions, Amy, can we wrap it up?
Yes, were there any, we were gonna open it up to Gary and Sarah, if there were any questions, or if anybody had a question they'd written on a notebook paper, you can hold that up and grab that, and we can address those, or we'll open it back up to include Gary and Sarah, and you can ask questions of them as well.
Okay. Any questions for Farm Doc folks? Did you count to 15 in your head?
No.
I
Did you?
No.
Okay.
Well, I heard a great saying this weekend, and I think it fits really well in this conversation. And blessed are the flexible, for they will never be bent out of shape. And so I think if we just kind of, hang on to that in this space and keep an open mind and, continue to educate ourselves and just be flexible, I do think this is going to turn up some opportunities for us in production agriculture. So.
Thank you to you 3 for taking the time to be here. We really appreciate you sharing some of the practices that you have adopted and implemented on your operations. So it's always good to hear from peers on what they're doing and how they've implemented things. So we do really appreciate the 3 of you taking the time to be here today with us. As a whole, let's give all of our speakers one more round of applause.